She was only 7 years old when she heard a piano for the first time. It was coming from a small television set in the corner of a neighbor's living room. The sound stopped her in her tracks. She stood frozen near the doorway, watching a woman in a long black dress move her fingers across black and white keys. The music filled the room like magic. It was soft, then loud, then soft again. It made her feel something she had never felt before. She did not know the name of the song. She did not understand what a piano was or how it worked. But in that moment, something changed inside her. She knew, even as a child, that she wanted to make that sound one day. Her name was Lena, and she lived in a small apartment on the 5th floor of an old building that always smelled like cooking oil and dampness. The walls were thin. The windows did not close properly. In winter, cold air slipped through the cracks, and her grandmother would stuff old newspapers into the gaps to keep them warm. There was no extra money for nice things. There was barely enough for food. Her grandmother worked long hours cleaning offices in the city, leaving early in the morning and coming home late at night with tired eyes and aching hands. Lena never complained. She understood, even at a young age, that life was hard and that her grandmother was doing everything she could, but she never forgot the piano. She started drawing one. It sounds silly now, but back then it was all she could think of. She found a large piece of cardboard behind a grocery store and brought it home. She sat on the floor of her tiny bedroom and carefully drew the keys with a black marker. She counted 88 of them because she had seen that number in a library book about music. She spent hours making sure each key was the right size. When it was done, she placed the cardboard on the floor and sat in front of it like it was a real instrument. And then she played dot, of course. No sound came out. But she pressed the keys anyway, one by one, imagining the notes in her head. She would hum quietly to herself, pretending that the music was filling the room. Her fingers moved across the paper as if something real was happening beneath them. To anyone watching, it might have looked strange, maybe even sad. But to Lena, it was everything. She practiced like this for years. Every day after school, while other children played outside, she sat in front of her cardboard piano and practiced. She borrowed books from the library about music theory. She watched videos on an old phone that her grandmother had found thrown away in a dumpster. The screen was cracked, and sometimes the videos would freeze, but she did not care. She would replay them over and over again until she understood what her fingers were supposed to do. She learned about scales, chords, and timing. She memorized the positions of every note. And still, she had never touched a real piano. Then one afternoon, everything changed. She was walking home from school, taking a different path than usual because she wanted to avoid a group of older kids who liked to make fun of her worn-out shoes. The shortcut took her behind an old church that she had passed many times but never really noticed. And there, sitting in the overgrown grass behind the building, was a piano. It was old. The wood was chipped. Some of the keys were missing, and the ones that remained were yellow with age. It looked forgotten, like something the world had thrown away. But to Lena, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then she walked over slowly, her heart beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She reached out and pressed one of the keys. The sound that came out was weak and out of tune, but it was real. It was music. Her eyes filled with tears. From that day on, the church piano became her secret. Every afternoon, she would sneak behind the building and play. At first, her fingers felt clumsy and unsure. The cardboard had taught her the positions, but the real keys were heavier. They pushed back. She had to learn how to press them with just the right amount of force. It took time, but she did not give up. Rain or shine, cold or hot, she was there. Sometimes the church caretaker, an elderly man who walked with a limp, would see her from a distance. He never said anything. He just watched, then quietly went back inside. She always wondered what he thought of her, but she never asked. Months passed. Then years. By the time she was 15, she could play songs that most trained students took years to learn. She had no teacher, no fancy music school, no expensive lessons, just determination, library books, and that old broken piano behind the church. Sometimes, late at night, she would lie in bed and wonder if she was fooling herself. Maybe she was not as good as she thought. Maybe real musicians would laugh at her. Maybe this dream was too big for someone like her. But every time those doubts crept in, she would remember the first time she heard the piano on that old television. She would remember how it made her feel. And she would tell herself to keep going. One rainy afternoon, while walking past a community bulletin board near the bus stop, something caught her eye. It was a flyer. Bright yellow paper with bold black letters. It announced a citywide talent competition, the biggest one in the region. Singers, dancers, musicians from all backgrounds were invited to audition. The winner would receive $50,000 and a chance to perform at the Grand City Concert Hall in front of thousands of people. Lena stood in the rain, staring at that flyer for a long time. $50,000. That was more money than her grandmother had made in the last 5 years combined. It could pay off debts, fix the leaking roof, maybe even get them a better apartment. But more than the money, there was something else. A feeling deep in her chest. A voice telling her that this was her moment. She reached out and tore off one of the small strips at the bottom of the flyer. On it was a phone number and a date. The auditions were in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to prove that she belonged. That night, she did not sleep. She sat in front of her cardboard piano, now worn and faded from years of use, and she made herself a promise. She would enter that competition. She would walk into that audition room, even if her clothes were old, even if she had no formal training, even if everyone looked at her like she did not belong, because she had something they could never take away from her. She had the music, and she had a fire inside her that no amount of doubt could ever put out. Little did she know, the journey ahead would test her in ways she never imagined. The road to that stage would be filled with pain, humiliation, and moments where she would want to give up. But it would also lead to something extraordinary, something that would change her life forever. This is her story. The 3 weeks before the audition were the longest of her life. Lena practiced every single day, sometimes for 5 or 6 hours straight. Her fingers would ache. Her back would hurt from sitting on the cold ground behind the church. But she did not stop. She could not stop. This was her one chance, and she was not going to waste it. She had chosen a piece by Chopin. It was called Ballade No. 1 in G minor. She had heard it once on that cracked phone of hers, and it had taken her breath away. The piece was beautiful, but also incredibly difficult. It had fast passages, soft moments, and a powerful ending that required perfect control. Most pianists trained for years before attempting it. Lena had never had a lesson in her life. But something about that piece called to her. It told a story of struggle and triumph, of darkness and light. It felt like her life, translated into music. The night before the audition, she could not sleep. She lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling, going over every note in her head. Her grandmother had noticed something was different. She had asked Lena if everything was okay, and Lena had simply smiled and said yes. She had not told her grandmother about the competition. She did not want to get her hopes up. What if she failed? What if she walked in there and forgot everything? What if they laughed at her? The morning came too quickly. Lena got dressed in the nicest clothes she had. It was a simple dress, dark blue, bought from a second-hand shop 2 years ago. It did not fit perfectly anymore. It was a little too tight around the shoulders and a little too short at the bottom. But it was clean, and it was all she had. She brushed her hair and tied it back with a plain rubber band. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror hanging on the wall. She did not look like a star. She looked like a girl from a poor neighborhood trying to pretend she belonged somewhere else, but she went anyway. The bus ride to the concert hall took almost an hour. She sat near the back, watching the city change outside the window. The buildings got taller. The streets got cleaner. The people walking on the sidewalks wore expensive clothes and carried shopping bags from stores she had only seen in magazines. By the time the bus stopped near the audition venue, Lena felt like she had traveled to another world. The concert hall was enormous. It had tall white pillars at the entrance and glass doors that sparkled in the sunlight. A red carpet led up the steps, and people were walking in and out like this was the most normal place in the world. Lena stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, just staring. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were sweating. A part of her wanted to turn around and go home. But then she thought about her grandmother. She thought about the leaking roof and the cold apartment and the years of struggle. She took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the building was even more impressive. The floors were made of shiny marble. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. There were people everywhere, some holding instruments, others carrying folders of sheet music. And they all looked like they belonged. They wore designer clothes. They had perfect hair. Some were accompanied by adults who looked like coaches or private tutors. They spoke with confidence, laughing and chatting like this was just another Tuesday. Lena felt invisible. She found the registration table and gave her name to the woman sitting there. The woman looked her up and down, her eyes pausing on Lena's worn-out shoes. She did not say anything rude, but her expression said enough. She handed Lena a number 17 and pointed toward a waiting area down the hall. The waiting area was a large room filled with chairs. Most of them were already taken by other contestants. Lena found an empty seat near the back and sat down quietly, clutching her number in her hands. She tried to make herself small. She tried not to be noticed, but it did not work. A group of 3 girls sitting nearby turned to look at her. They were around her age, maybe a little older. They wore matching outfits, clearly expensive, and their nails were painted with tiny musical notes. One of them whispered something to the others, and they all giggled. Lena pretended not to notice. She kept her eyes on the floor. Then one of them spoke up, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Did you get lost on your way to the thrift store?" More laughter. Lena's face burned with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run out of the room and never come back. But she stayed. She stayed because she had come too far to give up now. A boy sitting across the room joined in. He had slicked back hair and a shiny watch on his wrist. He looked at Lena with a smirk. "Let me guess. Self-taught, right? Learned piano from YouTube videos in your basement?" The room erupted in laughter again. Lena said nothing. She just sat there, gripping her number so tightly that the paper crumpled in her hands. She could feel tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people. An hour passed. Then, too, one by one, contestants were called to audition. Some came back smiling. Others came back looking disappointed. The group of girls went in together, apparently part of some kind of ensemble. When they returned, they were laughing and congratulating each other. They did not even glance at Lena. Finally, her number was called. Number 17. Lena stood up. Her legs felt weak. She walked toward the audition room, aware that people were watching her. She could hear whispers behind her. She could feel their eyes on her back. But she kept walking. The audition room was massive. There was a stage at the front, with a grand piano sitting in the center, gleaming under the bright lights. It was the most beautiful piano Lena had ever seen. It was black and polished, with keys that looked brand new. It probably cost more than everything her family had ever owned combined. 3 judges sat at a long table near the front of the stage. 2 men and 1 woman. They had notepads and pens and expressions that revealed nothing. Behind them, a few audience members had been allowed to watch. Some were parents of contestants. Others were talent scouts and music critics. And sitting among them were those same girls who had mocked her earlier. They were watching, waiting, ready to see her fail. Lena climbed the steps to the stage. Her shoes made a soft sound against the wood. She walked to the piano and stood beside it for a moment, just looking at it. Her hands were trembling. One of the judges, a man with gray hair and glasses, looked up from his notepad. "Name?" "Lena," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she wanted. "And where did you train, Lena?" She hesitated. She knew what would happen when she answered, but she could not lie. "I taught myself," she said, "on an old piano behind a church." For a moment there was silence. Then she heard it. A soft laugh from somewhere in the audience. Then another. The judge raised an eyebrow. The woman beside him exchanged a glance with the other man. They did not say anything, but their expressions spoke clearly. They did not believe her. Or worse, they did believe her, and they had already decided she was not worth their time. "Very well," the gray-haired judge said, his tone flat. "You may begin whenever you are ready." Lena turned and looked at the piano. She could feel the weight of every stare in the room. She could hear the whispers, the quiet laughter, the doubt. They had already made up their minds about her. They had already decided that she was nothing. She sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys. And in that moment, everything inside her went silent. The laughter faded. The whispers disappeared. It was just her and the piano. She took one last breath, and then she began to play. The first note came out wrong. It was too soft, too hesitant. Her finger had barely touched the key, and the sound that floated into the air was weak and uncertain. Lena felt her stomach drop. Behind her, she heard a quiet snicker from somewhere in the audience. Her face grew hot. Her mind started to race. What was she doing here? Who did she think she was? These people had spent years training at the best schools with the best teachers. They had practiced on grand pianos in beautiful studios. And here she was, a girl who had learned on a cardboard keyboard and a broken instrument behind a church. She did not belong here. She never did. Her hands froze above the keys. For a terrible moment, she could not move. She could not think. The room seemed to close in around her. The lights felt too bright. The silence felt too loud. She could feel the judges watching her, waiting. She could feel the audience staring, expecting her to fail. And the worst part was, she was about to prove them right, and something happened. A memory came to her, soft and unexpected, like a warm breeze on a cold night. She remembered being 7 years old, standing in that neighbor's doorway, hearing a piano for the first time. She remembered how the music had made her feel. It was like the world had stopped spinning just for a moment, like nothing else mattered except the sound. She remembered thinking that if she could ever make someone else feel that way, her life would mean something. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about those tired hands that had worked so hard for so many years. She thought about the nights when there was not enough food, and her grandmother would pretend she was not hungry so that Lena could eat. She thought about the dreams she had whispered into the darkness, dreams of a better life. dreams of making her grandmother proud. She thought about the old piano behind the church, the missing keys, the out-of-tune notes, the cold afternoons when her fingers would go numb, but she kept playing anyway. She had not come this far to give up now. She had not sacrificed all those years to walk away in silence. ... She was not going to let them win. Lena closed her eyes. She took a slow, deep breath. She let the fear and the doubt and the whispers fade away until there was nothing left but the music inside her. She had been carrying it her whole life. It was time to let it out. Her fingers found the keys again, and this time she played the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. One floated into the room like a quiet confession. They were gentle at first, soft and searching, like someone whispering a secret they had kept hidden for years. Lena did not think about the judges. She did not think about the audience. She did not think about the girls who had laughed at her or the boy with the shiny watch. She thought only about the music. She thought about loneliness, about all the nights she had spent practicing alone, with no one to tell her if she was doing it right. She let that loneliness flow through her fingers and into the keys. The notes became sadder, deeper, carrying the weight of everything she had felt, but never said out loud. Then the music began to build. The tempo quickened. The melody grew more urgent. Lena's fingers moved faster, dancing across the keys with a precision that surprised even her. She had played this piece 100 times on that old church piano, but it had never sounded like this. The Steinway responded to her touch in ways she had never experienced. Every note rang out clear and true. Every chord resonated through the room like a heartbeat. She thought about struggle, about waking up in a freezing apartment and pretending everything was fine, about watching other kids go to music lessons while she sat behind a church with an instrument the world had thrown away. She let that struggle pour into the music, and the melody became fierce, almost angry. It was the sound of someone fighting against a world that had tried to keep her down. The audience had gone completely silent. No more whispers. No more laughter. Lena could not see them because her eyes were still closed, but she could feel the shift in the room. Something had changed. The air felt different, heavier, like everyone was holding their breath. She did not slow down. The piece moved into its most difficult section, a cascade of notes that required speed, accuracy, and emotion all at once. This was the part that had taken her months to learn. This was the part where most pianists made mistakes, even those with years of formal training. Lena had practiced it so many times that her fingers knew the way by heart. They flew across the keys like they had been born to do this. And then came the soft part. The storm faded. The music became quiet again, tender, like a lullaby sung to a child who had been crying. Lena thought about hope, about the small moments of beauty she had found even in the hardest times. A sunset seen from her apartment window, a smile from her grandmother after a long day. The first time she had played a full song on that broken church piano and realized she could actually do this. Tears began to slide down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. She let them fall. Because this was not just a performance anymore. This was her life, her story, everything she had been too afraid to say. And she was saying it now, through every note, every chord, every breath. The final section of the piece approached. The music began to build again, louder and more powerful than before. Lena's hands moved with strength she did not know she had. The sound filled the entire room, bouncing off the walls, surrounding everyone in its embrace. It was triumphant. It was defiant. It was the sound of someone who had been told 1,000 times that she could not, and yet here she was, proving that she could. The last notes came crashing down like a wave, and then silence. Lena sat perfectly still, her fingers resting on the keys, her heart pounding in her chest. She was breathing hard. Her whole body was shaking. She did not know how long she had been playing. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been an hour. Time had disappeared the moment the music had taken over. Slowly, she opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the judges. All 3 of them were staring at her. The gray-haired man had taken off his glasses and was holding them in his hand, his mouth slightly open. The woman beside him had tears in her eyes. The other man was leaning forward in his chair, like he had forgotten how to sit back. Lena turned her head slightly and looked at the audience. The girls who had mocked her were sitting frozen in their seats. Their smirks were gone. Their faces were pale. The boy with the shiny watch was staring at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. And everyone else, every single person in that room, was looking at her like they were seeing her for the first time. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The silence was so thick that Lena could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. And then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone started to clap. One person. Slow and steady, Dot, and another joined in, and another, and another. The sound grew louder, faster, spreading through the room like a wave that could not be stopped. People began to rise from their seats. First one, then 5, then everyone. The applause swelled until it filled every corner of the auditorium, thundering against the walls, washing over Lina like something she had never felt before. She sat at the piano, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be seen, not for her clothes, not for her background, not for where she came from, but for who she truly was. The applause did not stop. Kept going, wave after wave, filling the auditorium with a sound Lena had never heard directed at her before. People were on their feet. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief, like they could not understand what they had just witnessed. Lena sat frozen at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In her small bedroom, behind the church, on the bus ride over, she had pictured herself playing well, maybe earning some polite applause, maybe not embarrassing herself completely. But this was something else entirely. This was something she had never dared to dream. Slowly, she stood up from the bench. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her. She turned to face the audience, and the applause grew even louder. She did not know what to do with her hands, so she just stood there, tears still wet on her cheeks, looking out at the sea of faces before her. And she saw them, the 3 girls who had mocked her in the waiting room. They were standing like everyone else, but they were not clapping. They just stared at her, with expressions that were hard to read. Shock, maybe, or shame, or something in between. The boy with the shiny watch was looking down at the floor, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He did not look up, not even once. Lena did not feel angry at them. She thought she would, but she did not. She just felt tired and relieved and overwhelmed all at once. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, feeling like she was not good enough. And now, for the first time, people were seeing her, really seeing her. A gray-haired judge stood up from his seat. The applause began to fade as people noticed him moving. He walked around the table and approached the edge of the stage, looking up at Lena with an expression she could not quite read. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying through the now quiet room. "How old are you?" 17, Lena answered. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The judge nodded slowly. He was silent for a moment, as if choosing his next words carefully. "I have been judging this competition for over 20 years, he said. "I have seen hundreds of performers walk across this stage. Conservatory students, prodigies, musicians who have trained with the finest teachers in the world. He paused. What you just did, I have never seen anything like it. A murmur rippled through the audience. The woman judge stood up as well. Her eyes were still red from crying. The technique alone was remarkable, she said. But it was more than that. You played with a depth of emotion that most musicians spend their entire lives trying to achieve. Where did you learn to play like that? Lena swallowed hard. I taught myself, she said again, on a broken piano behind a church. The room went completely silent. The third judge, a younger man with dark hair, leaned forward. No formal training at all? No, sir. He sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. Unbelievable, he muttered, just loud enough for the microphone to pick up. The gray-haired judge looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. It was the first time she had seen any of the judges smile all day. Lena, he said, you have not just passed the audition. You have set a new standard for what we expect to see on this stage. Welcome to the finals. The audience erupted again. This time, the applause was mixed with cheers and shouts. Lena stood there, unable to move, unable to speak. She had made it. Against all odds, against every person who had ever doubted her, she had made it. She walked off the stage in a daze. Her feet carried her down the steps and through the side door, back into the hallway. She needed air. She needed a moment to breathe. She found a quiet corner near a window and leaned against the wall, pressing her hand to her chest. Her heart was still racing. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw one of the girls from earlier, the one who had made the thrift store comment. She was walking toward Lena slowly, her arms crossed, her expression uncertain. Lena braced herself. She did not know what to expect. Another insult? A sarcastic remark? But the girl stopped a few feet away and just stood there for a moment. Then she spoke. I owe you an apology. Lena blinked. She had not expected that. What I said earlier, it was cruel and wrong. The girl looked down at her expensive shoes. I have been training since I was 5 years old. Private lessons, summer programs, the best teacher's money can buy. And I could never play the way you just did. She looked up again, and there was something different in her eyes. Something that looked almost like respect. I do not know how you did it, but you deserve to be here more than any of us. Lena did not know what to say. For a moment, the two of them just stood there in silence. Thank you, Lena finally said. That means a lot. The girl nodded once, then turned and walked away without another word. Lena watched her go. She did not feel victorious or smug. She just felt grateful. Grateful that she had not given up. Grateful that she had trusted herself, even when no one else did. That evening, she took the long bus ride back home. The city lights blurred past the window as she replayed the day in her mind. She still could not believe it had really happened. She, Lena, the girl who had learned piano on a piece of cardboard, was going to compete in the finals of the biggest talent competition in the region. When she finally walked through the door of her apartment, her grandmother was sitting at the small kitchen table, waiting. She looked up with worried eyes. Where have you been? I was so worried. You were gone all day. Lena sat down across from her. She took her grandmother's hands in her own. They were rough and worn from years of hard work, but to Lena, they were the most beautiful hands in the world. Grandma, she said softly, I need to tell you something. And she told her everything. About the competition, about the audition, about the laughter and the doubt, and the moments she almost gave up, about the music that had poured out of her when she finally let go, about the standing ovation and the judges, and the girl who had apologized By the time she finished, her grandmother was crying. "My girl," she whispered, cupping Lena's face in her hands. "My beautiful, brave girl. I always knew you were special. From the moment you started playing that cardboard piano, I knew." Lena laughed through her own tears. "You never said anything." "I did not have to," her grandmother said. "You already knew. You just needed to believe it." They held each other for a long time. Two people who had faced so much hardship, finally seeing a glimpse of something brighter. The finals were in 1 week. 1 week to prepare for the biggest moment of her life. 1 week to prove that what had happened today was not a fluke. The other finalists would be watching her now. They would be studying her. Some of them would be hoping she would fail, but Lena was not afraid anymore. She had walked into that audition as a nobody, a girl with nothing but a dream and a worn-out dress. She had been laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated at every turn, and she had proven them all wrong. Now it was time to finish what she had started. The night of the finals arrived faster than Lena had expected. 1 week had felt like both a lifetime and a single breath. She had practiced every day, returning to the old church piano, as she always did. But something was different now. When she played, she was not just a girl with a dream anymore. She was a finalist. She had earned her place. And for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could actually win. The concert hall looked different at night. It was lit up like a palace, with golden lights glowing against the dark sky. A long line of people stretched from the entrance all the way down the block. This was no longer a private audition. This was the main event. Thousands of people had come to watch. Television cameras were set up near the stage. The whole city seemed to be holding its breath. Lena stood outside for a moment, looking up at the building. She was wearing a new dress. It was simple and black, bought with money her grandmother had been saving for emergencies. When Lena had protested, her grandmother had simply shaken her head and said, "This is an emergency. My granddaughter is going to shine tonight, and she is going to look beautiful doing it." She walked through the entrance and made her way backstage. The other finalists were already there, 8 of them in total. Some were pacing nervously. Others were doing warm-up exercises with their fingers. A few were surrounded by coaches and family members, receiving last-minute advice. Lena had no coach, no entourage, just herself and the music she carried inside. She found a quiet corner and sat down. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. Tonight, she would play a different piece, something even more challenging than before. It was Liszt's La Campanella, a piece famous for its speed, its delicate high notes, and its almost impossible technical demands. She had chosen it because it was beautiful, because it was difficult, and because she wanted to show the world what she was truly capable of. The competition began. One by one, the finalists took the stage. A young man played a fiery piece by Rachmaninoff, his fingers attacking the keys with power and precision. A girl performed a gentle Mozart sonata, her playing clean and controlled. Another contestant delivered a dramatic Beethoven piece that earned loud applause from the crowd. Each performance was impressive. Each one reminded Lena of how much talent surrounded her, but she did not let herself feel small. Not anymore. When her name was finally called, she stood up slowly. Her legs felt steady this time. Her hands were calm. She walked toward the stage entrance, and just before she stepped into the light, she paused and whispered something to herself. "This is for you, Grandma. This is for every cold night and every tired morning. This is for believing in me when no one else did." Then she walked onto the stage. The audience was enormous. Thousands of faces stretched out before her, a sea of eyes all focused on the small figure walking toward the grand piano. The lights were bright and warm. The cameras followed her every step. Somewhere out there, her grandmother was watching from a seat in the front row. The best seat Lina could get for her Dot. She reached the piano and sat down. She adjusted the bench slightly, took a breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. And then she played Dot La Campanella, began with a soft, high melody. It sounded like tiny bells ringing in the distance, delicate and pure. Lina's fingers moved with precision, dancing across the upper keys with a lightness that made it look effortless. But it was not effortless. It was the result of years of practice, of sacrifice, of refusing to give up even when everything seemed impossible. The piece grew more complex. Rapid runs of notes cascaded down the keyboard like waterfalls. Lina's hands leaped across the keys, covering distances that seemed almost too wide to reach. The audience watched in stunned silence. Even the other finalists, watching from backstage, could not look away. She thought about her journey, every step of it. The cardboard keyboard in her tiny bedroom, the cracked phone with the frozen videos, the cold afternoons behind the church, playing until her fingers went numb, the laughter in the waiting room, the moment she almost gave up Dot, and now here she was. The music swelled. The tempo increased. Lina pushed herself harder, faster, pouring every ounce of her soul into the performance. Sweat formed on her forehead, but she did not stop. She could not stop. The music had taken over, carrying her along like a river that knew exactly where it was going. The final section arrived. A dizzying sequence of notes that climbed higher and higher, building toward a breathtaking finish. Lina's fingers flew across the keys with a speed that seemed almost superhuman. The audience gasped. Some leaned forward in their seats. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. And then, with one final glittering chord, it was over. Silence for a single heartbeat. The entire concert hall was completely still, and then the world exploded. The applause was deafening. It crashed over her like a tidal wave, louder than anything she had ever heard. People jumped to their feet. Some were cheering. Some were crying. The sound filled every corner of the massive hall, echoing off the walls and ceiling until it felt like the building itself was shaking. Lina sat at the piano, tears streaming down her face. She looked out at the audience and found her grandmother. The old woman was standing, her hands pressed to her heart, tears flowing freely down her weathered cheeks. She was smiling, the biggest smile Lina had ever seen. The judges did not need long to make their decision. When the host walked onto the stage to announce the winner, the room fell silent once more. Lina stood with the other finalists, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it did not matter if she won. She had already proven herself. She had already come further than she ever thought possible. But then the host opened the envelope and read the name. The winner of this year's competition, with the highest score in the event's history, Lina. The world seemed to stop. She heard cheering, but it sounded far away, like it was coming from another room. She felt hands pushing her gently forward, toward the center of the stage. Someone placed a trophy in her hands. It was heavy and golden and real. A large check was presented to her. $50,000. Enough to change everything. But the money was not what mattered most. What mattered was the little girl who had once drawn piano keys on a piece of cardboard and pretended to play. What mattered was the teenager who had practiced on a broken instrument that the world had thrown away. What mattered was the young woman who had been laughed at and dismissed and told she did not belong. She had proven them all wrong. In the weeks that followed. Lina's life changed in ways she could never have imagined. A famous music academy offered her a full scholarship. A renowned pianist who had been in the audience that night reached out to become her mentor. Her story spread across the internet, inspiring millions of people who had ever felt like they were not good enough. She used some of the prize money to fix her grandmother's apartment. New windows that actually closed, a roof that did not leak, a warm, safe home for the woman who had sacrificed everything for her. And she used some of it for something else. She went back to the old church. She found the caretaker, the elderly man who had watched her practice all those years without ever saying a word. She thanked him, and then she arranged for a brand new piano to be donated to the church, so that any other child who wandered by might have the chance to discover the magic of music, just like she had. Months later, a reporter asked her what she would say to anyone who had ever been told they could not succeed. Lena smiled softly and thought for a moment. I would tell them that your beginning does not determine your ending, she said. It does not matter where you start. It does not matter what you do not have. What matters is what you are willing to fight for. If you have a dream, hold on to it. Work for it. Believe in it even when no one else does. Because sometimes the people who have the least are the ones who have the most to give. She paused and looked out the window, remembering the little girl with the cardboard piano. They laughed when I sat down to play, she said quietly, but I kept playing anyway. And eventually the laughter stopped, and the music remained.